And joining me is Andrew Murray from the organization Mothers Against Drunk Driving. Andrew, talk a little bit about what your thoughts are regarding the upcoming rules as far as they apply to marijuana being legal in Canada. Is this another headache for your organization in terms of concerns that people are going to be driving basically high?
We do have concerns. One of the big things that's reducing our concerns is there's a bill going through the Senate right now that deals with impaired driving. It will give officers a lot more tools to deal with drug impaired driving. So we're very appreciative of that. We've had a major problem with drugs and driving since 2010. We've seen a rapid rise in it long before legalization. I mean, some of these illegal dispensaries, the increased number of people that have medical cannabis and the lack of enforcement tools for police have kind of caused the problem we have. The numbers for alcohol are way down, which we're really pleased with and happy. So we do have some concerns, but if certain things are done before legalization, unlike the United States, we might be in a better situation to deter some of this after legalization.
Now, speaking of the United States, there are, of course, two states, Colorado and Washington, where we have some data available as a result of having marijuana legal in those two states. And one of the more disturbing pieces of data that we're seeing is just the number of fatalities that may be linked to cannabis use. They have found the element that gets you high, the THC, uh, or whatever that chemical is, that they have found that exhibited in some of the victims of these fatalities. In fact, they have found quite a dramatic spike in the number of people who've been killed in accidents and what they have found linked to cannabis use. Does that trouble you? Are we headed in that direction here in Ontario and in Canada?
Well, I think the problem with the US is the way they did it. So prior to the referendum to legalize, they weren't doing an especially good job of actually measuring cannabis fatalities. And so all of a sudden, when they legalized, they stepped up their ability to measure and test all dead drivers for it. So, yes, you're seeing a tremendous spike, but I don't think it's an apple to apple comparison. I don't think they were doing such a good job before. I feel very confident in Canada that we've been measuring this for, almost 10 years prior to legalization. So if we do see a spike, we're going to be able to measure it. We're going to know the reason for it. The other thing in Washington State and Colorado, they have not been able to convince their state governments to use oral fluid testing as a screening tool to detect, cannabis drivers, impaired drivers by drugs. And we feel that's the equivalent to a breathalyzer. So they don't have that in the US. And so I think that's a major mistake in policy, a major mistake in, the likelihood of seeing that rapid increase because they haven't got it under control. So I think we're better positioned. I don't have any idea if we're going to see a spike. Sometimes if you do a lot of this work prior to legalization, it actually deters people from doing it in the first place, and you're not going to see that spike. And that's what we're hoping for. That's what all the plans are for. We also are going to have extensive educational programs to advise people that use cannabis and want to drive when the best time for it is. And so again, none of that was done in the US. Like all their campaigns, they had to raise money before they would spend money on campaigns, which is a backwards way of doing it. So I think, the US has done it wrong. I think we have an opportunity in Canada to do a better job. I'm, you know, I'd be really happy, 6 months, a year out after legalization if we've accomplished our goal, which is to lower those numbers. Because
I,
they're on a spike right now.
yeah, I sometimes wonder when you see governments who are clearly cash strapped, like in Ontario, they're salivating over the prospect of getting millions of dollars from people who are buying legalized marijuana. And in their rush to get that money, that they overlook perhaps or gloss over the concerns that some people have that they're going to see a spike in the number of fatalities like they have in the United States. And I take your point, by the way, that maybe we're doing it a little bit better up here. I hope that's the case. But do you ever wonder that somehow governments are somehow torn between wanting that extra revenue and dealing with the possible downside, which is namely more accidents and possibly more fatalities?
Well, it's like alcohol. I mean, when you look at the government systems, and there's a wide body of evidence that the government systems like the LCBO here in Ontario do a better job of selling alcohol in a responsible way than private stores. And so the fact that in Ontario we're going to have a government control system, I think the province of Ontario is doing a very cautious way. They've got good provincial legislation, zero tolerance for young drivers, zero tolerance for commercial drivers. So they've already put in place things that are going to be above what all the good things that the federal government is doing. So again, I mean, I'm not as encouraged by some other provinces that are privatizing the system. And so, I'm concerned that they're not going to sell cannabis in a responsible way. And they, more than like a government entity, is more likely to be driven by profit, sell to people that are intoxicated, sell to people that are underage, than a government type of, entity that, prides itself on its, part of community safety. So, that's one of the things that we also ask the provinces to do, and it's been split across the country, is to, especially in the initial years, keep it tightly controlled, regulate sales. And some provinces have listened and other provinces have not.
So, last question: is there any message that you would give the government of Kathleen Wynne, or perhaps, and that may change, of course, after June, but is there any message that you would give to the provincial government and even the federal government as they embark? Because, of course, we're just a few months away now from moving ahead with this plan to legalize and to regulate and sell.
So for the federal government, what I would do is basically they need to allow a gap of time between when the impaired driving laws are passed and when cannabis comes legal. Somewhere in the 3 to 4 month range would be ideal so that police can get these new tools, police can do the training, we can get those public education messages out prior to cannabis being sold. So there's going to be a lot of pressure on both ends, but ideally, we'd like to see longer than 4 months, but being realistically, even that time frame, is tight. There needs to be also a commitment to continuously fund police to do the job that they need to do. On the provincial side, what I would suggest with all the provinces is, go slow. You know, take your time with this. There's no big rush, to open up hundreds of these type of stores. There's availability to buy online. And let's figure this system out. Let's figure out the best control type of system. Let's figure out what the customers are doing. Are the customers being responsible when they're buying? And then so we'll figure it out. I mean, and I hope that it takes us a lot less time to figure this out than it did with alcohol.
Right. And of course, your final message, of course, to the end user, Andrew, is don't underestimate the impact of this substance in your body, because I think there are a lot of people who, for instance, might think, well, I'm not going to get drunk, I'll get high instead, and it'll be okay for me
Sure.
to get behind the wheel of a car. Because I think we're seeing some recent studies coming out of the United States where people think it's safer psychologically to get in a car with somebody who's had some marijuana rather than somebody who has a few drinks. But in fact, that may not be the case.
Yeah, there's a real, there's an emphasis for new users. So this is people that are coming back to cannabis or trying it for the first time. They should go really slow and really low. So the dosage they should use should be really low so they customize their use to it. They get used to being, high from it. And, don't even think about driving for at least 6 hours, or if you still feel high, wait a longer period of time. It comes out of the body a lot quicker than alcohol, but you still need to use it with caution because it does impair your abilities to drive a motor vehicle.
It sounds like you guys are kind of wait and see on this whole thing, aren't you? I mean, your organization. On
No, we've been well ahead of this. We've been in front of the federal government, the provincial governments across the country, giving advice, and a lot of times, the advice we've given has been taken, and we can see that advice in the legislation or in the educational programs. And so we've had a long history of working both with provincial and federal governments on this issue with alcohol, and we're applying that same partnership with cannabis and with other drugs as well. It's just not cannabis. Other drugs, inhibit your ability to drive safely as well.
Thank you very much, Andrew Murray, CEO of MADD Canada. We hope we can check in with you perhaps a little later on in the future when you're starting to see the law roll out and we're starting to see more of the impact.
I look forward to that.